The Bank of England is reporting a full-blown emergency. Right now, it's not possible to deliver gold bars. The reason is that gold bars are too heavy. This is a total pro-Bitcoin statement being made here. If it isn't clear now that we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve in central banks, then I don't know what is. A lot of people here are deeply worried because the payouts now take several months and you can't get your gold. And we really need to take a look at this, because not only is what's happening here super embarrassing, but it's also extremely critical for Bitcoin. Additionally, we see that Michael Saylor is continuing his orange pilling tour. He meets with the CEO of GameStop and here, there's speculation about whether GameStop might allocate their excess liquidity into Bitcoin now. We have exciting new background information on the strategic Bitcoin reserve in the USA. And it now looks as if Hong Kong and China, they're making a pivot and increasingly opening up to Bitcoin. First, let's take a look at what's going on with the Central Bank of England, because I keep saying it. The properties of Bitcoin are just way superior to gold. We have better transportability, better verifiability. Bitcoin is scarcer, rarer, and so on. And now, in the end, here is the absolute worst case. I mean, just look at this. For example, you have Bitcoin sitting on an exchange. Suddenly, the exchange says, no, you can't withdraw any more Bitcoin. And just like that, what happened here in England is that you have gold just sitting around. And suddenly the Bank of England says, no, we can't deliver any more gold. I did some digging here. And the Bank of England holds gold reserves for over 30 central banks and foreign governments. I mean, just think about that. For example, Switzerland is storing money here. Saudi Arabia, Russia, India, and many other countries want to withdraw their money now. And the Bank of England just says, no sorry, bro, that's not happening right now. Gold just weighs too much. It's just too heavy. You can't get to your money right now. But just take a look at the statement here from the central bank about how it is coming under pressure. And it's almost embarrassing. But this is the best argument and the best advertising that could possibly happen for Bitcoin.
There's been strong demand for delivery slots. We can meet that demand. All of our main counterparties, as it were, or better to say, all of those bodies who ship the gold have, they've all got the delivery slots they need over the next few weeks. If you were coming in new to us, wait a bit longer because all the existing slots are booked up. But this is a very orderly process. It is worth stressing compared to some of the markets we usually talk about. I mean, it's an obvious point, but gold is a physical asset, so there are real logistics.
I mean, it's an obvious point, but gold is a physical asset. So there's real logistics. ETF, Gold Force, like how gold trumps everything. I'm storing relevant gold ETFs here, putting money in, and then the gold from the central bank simply comes along and starts to take over here. And they said, hey folks, just relax. We've got everything under control. You just have to wait a few more months until your gold gets here. But now he explains, and this is the most relevant part, why it is so difficult, why there are these delays, and why it is ultimately so difficult to deliver.
But, gold is a physical asset, so there are real logistical constraints and security constraints. Getting into the bank for me this morning was a bit trickier because there was a lorry in the bullion yard. I mean, that's how it. But that's just the reality of it. It takes time, and the stuff is also quite heavy, as you know. So. But I think these things sometimes get forgotten about in a headline that says, there's a 6-week delay or something like that. There's a lot of demand, but we've got slots for all the people who currently want to get their gold or want to ship gold on behalf of a customer, and we're managing it.
Did you see how the audience started laughing when he said, yeah? The reality is, it takes time. Because gold is just really, really heavy. But that is ultimately the argument for Bitcoin. If you can just, let's say, ship Bitcoin around the world in seconds, or not ship it, and he says it too, it's physical, security is an issue. Of course, you need some big, transports or something like that, I mean, just imagine you want to just somehow take away 10 tons of gold or something like that. You can't just go there like that and say, okay, I'm taking 10 tons of gold with me. But you have to do it somehow with tanks, with warships. Or roll in with helicopters or with your own army to pick the stuff up. And we can see it too. The price of gold is going up. And now it seems like there are a lot of investors who are saying, okay, I had it stored somewhere, but maybe I don't trust the bank anymore. And that's always the problem. So, for example, if everyone just leaves their money in the bank, or everyone just leaves their Bitcoin on an exchange, or everyone just leaves their gold, with any warehouse, everything works relatively well. But problems always arise when demand suddenly increases, as is now happening here at the Federal Reserve Bank of America. And when suddenly a whole bunch of people want to get their gold, either because there's some uncertainty or because the price of gold shoots up. If suddenly everyone wants to get their money, everyone wants their euros, everyone wants their gold, or everyone wants their Bitcoins, then you have central points like the exchanges, like the central banks, or even the banks that start sweating here. And then ultimately the question is whether the bank, the central bank, the stock exchange is even solvent. And then it also comes to light when there are paper Bitcoins, when there are paper gold, when in the end things are issued that aren't really backed by anything physical. And that could also lead to a collapse. First of all, because the supply chains are breaking down, and gold just can't be delivered anymore. Or with a bank, it's like this. During a bank run, if there isn't enough money in the bank, then the bank obviously has a liquidity problem and can't deliver the cash. At a Bitcoin exchange, it could also happen that, for example, an exchange issues paper Bitcoins, meaning Bitcoins that aren't backed by real Bitcoins, as we saw with FTX. Then the exchange basically goes bankrupt, and those are basically the dangers here. And that's why it's important to withdraw your Bitcoin, to keep it in self-custody. That's why I'm putting a link down below to a hardware wallet where you can easily, safely, and simply store your Bitcoin yourself, without having to rely on a central bank or anything like that. I don't want to say that the Bank of England is on the verge of collapse or anything like that, but you can see that if, for example, a crisis situation really does arise, then many people will say, okay, gold is a crisis asset or something like that. But if you can't really withdraw it because everyone wants to pull out at the same time and there are delivery issues, then it doesn't really help much. And in the end, you have to keep in mind the same things that apply to a bank also apply to gold. And you should also consider this with Bitcoin. Don't leave too much money sitting on an exchange and better withdraw it. David Bailey said something interesting about this. He says, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I find it very unlikely that anything other than Bitcoin will be included in the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. The report from the Working Group on Digital Assets will have significant implications beyond the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. In the end, it could come down to only Bitcoin being in the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And that's ultimately what's important here in relation to gold. Because only Bitcoin has the value storage properties like gold does. I mean, gold has done that very, very well. This isn't an anti-gold video or anything. You can still use gold, but then you have to physically withdraw it. In the end, it's just a sign. If you have gold, withdraw it. If you have Bitcoin, withdraw it. And here, David Bailey makes the pitch again. It only makes sense for us to include Bitcoin in the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve because only Bitcoin has the qualities that are ultimately needed for a strategic reserve asset. So, the scarcity, divisibility, censorship resistance, and of course, the portability, which is way, way better than with gold. But we were talking about the difference between a strategic reserve that still includes all coins and a strategic reserve that's truly Bitcoin only, which would really be an actual strategic Bitcoin reserve. And then something super interesting happened here. It's a meeting here between Michael Saylor and Ryan Cohen, the CEO of GameStop. What's really exciting about GameStop is that they have very, very large cash reserves. They have about 4.8 or 4.6 billion in cash reserves here. And in the end, we saw Michael Saylor yesterday with Eric Trump and his daughter. I don't even remember her name, Sarah, Trump or something like that. I have no idea, can't quite piece it all together. And now it connects here with Ryan Cohen. Well, it seems like he's really on a big orange pill tour. He's trying to orange pill one big player after another. And he also recently met with the Rumble MC, who is also getting into Bitcoin. That means you can see here that I wouldn't say Michael Saylor's success rate is 100%, but it is relatively high. So when he posts a photo, like a selfie with someone, it's usually a sign that he's either orange-pilled that person or that they're currently in the orange-pilling process. And a lot of people are speculating that Rumble is basically getting into Bitcoin. Ryan Cohen is also known to be open to Bitcoin himself, as well as crypto stories and such. And over the last 6 months, there's been this ongoing question, like, okay, will the excess liquidity at GameStop be allocated into Bitcoin? But now we definitely have the strongest indication that GameStop is going to pursue a Bitcoin strategy. Because a lot of people are saying, for example, that the classic business line of GameStop, the business model, isn't really working anymore. So, they really need to expand their business field now. And accordingly, you could take a page out of MicroStrategy's book here, and in the end, they could also pursue a Bitcoin strategy. I don't know if you should go about it as aggressively as Michael Saylor does. But in any case, you could save your cash reserves like that and potentially bring massive benefits to the company. Feel free to let me know in the comments below if you think GameStop is really getting into Bitcoin, or if this is all just hot air. And then there was something very, very interesting here. And it says here, Hong Kong is now officially accepting Bitcoin and crypto as proof of assets for applying for a residency permit. And then Vivek adds that China is preparing because Hong Kong has a direct influence on China as a special economic zone. And if they're doing experiments in Hong Kong, then it could also mean that it might eventually spill over into China. Basically, it's all about swapping. We can see that in Hong Kong, the Bitcoin regulation is a bit more open than it is in China. There are also people who are basically advocating for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So, Hong Kong is the big testing ground where they're trying out, okay, hey, how does this look? Is this going to work with Bitcoin? Isn't it working? And if that works out, it could mean that this whole thing swaps over to China. And that would be massive. China has now also said that Bitcoin is an asset here. That in the end, Bitcoin would be somewhat legitimized here. They've already made a bit of a pivot. It's not as strictly regulated as it used to be, back when there was a complete ban on mining and stuff like that. while others say that the mining ban was never really enforced, and so on. There are all sorts of different opinions. I can't really judge that because I've never been to China. In another report, it says here that Hong Kong lawmakers are pushing for Bitcoin to be included in the strategic reserve. That's what I just mentioned. He says the latest US move requires swift action. So in the end, just like Donald Trump says, we must not allow ourselves to be dependent on China. Just like the Chinese might be realizing now that we can't let ourselves be dependent on the US either. And in the end, this is a very, very significant development that's coming our way. Because if we have a competition between China and the US, then it means, of course, number go up here for Bitcoin. But I mean, in the end, that's still nothing set in stone. These are basically the considerations that are happening here. Sure, there are now the first little regulations opening up for Bitcoin. But there's still quite a bit missing when it comes to buying Bitcoin. And if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. See you later. Peace out.